Hey, my name is Coral, and I'm here today to give you kind of an overview of my take of the Epix Gen 2, which I have right here, the new Garmin watch that came out this year. But in reality, what I want to do in this video is kind of talk about what I think is the big shortcomings of the Garmin ecosystem. Because while this watch is great, I've been carrying the Fenix 5 for a couple of years, and I've noticed some patterns. You see, I also happen to have used the Oregon 600, the Oregon 300, and the Edge 830. So from my perspective, I just see a lot of problems with the ecosystem. And even though this is a significant improvement, it's really clear that Garmin has some stuff to work on. So let's start with the positive things. What is great about this watch? And then we'll work our way to kind of like what's negative about the entire Garmin ecosystem, to be honest. So to start with, if you're gonna buy a Garmin watch, I need to just tell you what it's for. It is not really a smartwatch. People will challenge me on this, we'll get to that as well. I think Garmin is really, really good when it comes to just like being a focused running, hiking, biking. And Garmin is working their way to like make it a smartwatch by providing auxiliary features like Garmin Pay, music, etc. But at the core of the watch, it's still a very good sports watch. So I think, if that's the only takeaway you're going to take from this video, if you're going to buy a Garmin, don't expect it to be a smartwatch, expect it to be a running watch. So let's take a look at the Garmin Epix Gen 2 here. First of all, I just want to highlight that the best part about this watch, it's basically feature identical with the Garmin Fenix 7, except for the screen. The screen is the upgrade. And it's a pretty expensive watch, I'm not gonna lie, but compared it to like basically the screen you get on, this is the Fenix 5, and I know the screen is a bit better on the Fenix 6 and the Fenix 7, but this is the MIP, memory in pixel screen, that is on the older Garmin, which is kind of the Fenix series screen. And it's just like this, the contrast here is just not there. And it's very easy to make out in daylight, but it lacks the contrast. And it turns out contrast is extremely important when you're trying to do good mapping. So more on that in a second. So going back to the Garmin, you can see, I'm not a super athlete, which should be said. Like I'm a kind of like a regular person that likes to run, likes to bike, but I've used this now for about 1.5 months, and I've used this one since 2017. So I feel at least pretty empowered now to make a judgment call on like what's good about this watch compared to the old one. And I will say that I did borrow my friend's Fenix 6 Solar for a while to try it out. I ended up not buying one because I think that like at that point there wasn't too much that stood out. I liked the new menu system, but at that point like this kind of worked, and I didn't think the GPS was that much better in the new one. But one thing that really worried me when considering the Epix Gen 2 or the Fenix 7 was something that tech reviewers have kind of already talked about. How is the OLED screen going to perform outside in direct sunlight? The old Fenix screen, even though, lacking contrast, really bad, it's readable outside. I gotta give this screen this. When you have direct sunlight, you can definitely make text out. So I was a bit worried, like, how is this new watch going to do outside? And I think the best way to showcase this to you is that I took the watch outside today. It's a beautiful sunny spring in San Francisco. We had sharp afternoon sun, like basically the worst possible conditions for an OLED screen. So I thought like, to show you how it's going to look like. And you can clearly see that while it's not, the same amount of contrast that you get from another screen, it's absolutely readable. This is in full sun, right? So I have the sun pointing directly to the screen. You can still make out exactly what's happening. You can make out details on the map. You can make out colors. You can make out text. It is very easy to read, and this is in direct sunlight. And actually, these conditions doesn't happen that often as you think. But comparing it to the old watch, it's clear that the old watch is sharper in direct sunlight, but it's only sharper in direct sunlight. And that is why I think the Epix win. It's because majority of time, you're actually more in the shade in other environments than you think. Very few times where I've been out running in San Francisco, which again, is almost sun every day of the year here, except for August. Maybe if you run in a desert 24/7, you would prefer the Fenix screen, but I do not run in a desert. So for me, it's a great screen. This thing, the GPS is phenomenal. If I say that, there's going to be like 100 people and like maybe even DC Rainmaker is going to show up here and tell me otherwise. But for what I do and the stuff I do, I've seen significant improvements. I can see on the GPS maps which side of the road I am at. I can see on the maps kind of like, even the pathing you took on the sidewalks, at least in San Francisco, is visible when using this GPS, which like this sometimes wouldn't even tell you if you're on the right road. So this is a significant improvement in GPS performance, at least for me. So I think what else is good about this, and this is not going to be news to anyone who had the Phoenix 6, that the Epix 2 and the Phoenix 7 has kind of the new UI in which you have these thing called glances that you can scroll over. But it does come with touch, as you just noticed, which the Phoenix 6 did not. So what I'm able to do is I can just like use my finger and scroll, and that makes this so much better. It's hard to describe because a lot of like, Garmin diehards are like, I will never use the touch. At least that's what I saw before this watch came out. But if you compare to at least the Phoenix 5, going through the menu system here is just so tedious. And because you see the lag between each of these and the buttons are like squishy, makes it that the features that you could put on these kind of data screens that were, the watch data screens, they ended up not being that used. I rarely asked my clock like what's on my calendar. I rarely used my clock to figure out like what's happening today, especially because the Bluetooth connection was also terrible at Phoenix 5, but we'll get to that in a bit. But with the Epix Gen 2, it's fast, it's responsive, and I can do this. I can just like scroll until I get what I want and check it. And it really works. So touch and this watch together, I think this is true for the Phoenix 7 as well, is actually a significant improvement if you're using this as more like a smartwatch rather than just a running watch. And if you're worried, like, oh, is this going to mess up my run? You probably already read this. If you go into an activity, it disables touch for you. You can configure this per activity. So like it's not going to mess up your run or your bike trip or whatever it is, right? So where this screen really shines, when it comes to mapping, because this screen makes maps look great. I have the old Oregon 600 here with topographical maps that I've been using a long time. I don't think it's going to show here, but like it's been a great device. It has maps. It's pretty, recently fast. It works great if you're out hiking, but it's this big. It's a huge device and it eats AA batteries. So, for me, being able to actually use map this way has been fantastic. So I'm going to show you here how the maps look. Here we have Golden Gate Park, and you can see the detail of this, especially when you're running. When you're doing this, it's kind of sluggish, just like zoom around, but especially when you're running, trails are crystal clear. If you have it zoomed in like this, you can easily see where each trail lead, and it's actually been a really fun watch to use just as like a hiking GPS and a running trail watch. And I didn't think, based on my experience with the Phoenix 6, that this would actually work. But if you are into kind of like doing more, just trail running and configuring trails on the computer, sending like custom trails to this thing, and just like going out, doing like a half marathon with like unknown paths, this watch makes it so much more fun. What I think is good about this watch as well is Garmin finally understood that like, hey, selling $99 maps in 2022 is not really something you can do anymore when it's free on the Apple Watch. So if you buy the Sapphire version, it comes with global maps, which means that you can download maps for Europe or Asia, which wasn't possible, at least without paying, on the old watch. It's frustrated me. I do travel a lot, and like when I want maps is when I travel. I know, to be honest, I know San Francisco pretty well. I don't really need maps to run San Francisco. But if I travel to a couple of countries in Europe and want to do a trail run, that's when the mapping really becomes handy, because you're able to discover trails just by the detail that Garmin's maps provides. So it's kind of a bummer that they didn't used to do it, but they finally made up their mind, and they're now providing free worldwide mapping with the watch. And I think that's a significant improvement, and I'm kind of glad that they figured it out. It just took a bit too long, to be honest. So after looking at the kind of positives with the Epix Gen 2 that are also to a degree true for the Phoenix 7, and I guess for the Phoenix 6 as well, because the features are sort of iterating for each watch, let's talk about what I think the problems with the entire Garmin ecosystem is. And again, I showed you, I do own a lot of Garmin devices, and I've used them for many, many years. I think my Oregon 300 I bought back in 2008, right? So it's been almost 14 years at this point with Garmin devices. And I think the biggest problem I have with Garmin devices is that Garmin's software engineering philosophy seems to be, at least is what I've come to realize over the year, is like they want to provide as many features as possible to sell the device. But the problem is that they tend to release these features half-baked. It's like they need to tick the box. Like, yes, we have music. Yes, we have this. Yes, we have like video workouts. But it turns out you only have 2 workout programs. So what's the point of having video workouts on a watch, for example? And there are tons of these kinds of half-baked features on the Epix Gen 2 and the Fenix 7, in my opinion. So let's start with the first one, right? And this is something that I think has been especially true of the Fenix 5, but to a degree exists on the Epix Gen 2 as well, which is just the synchronization between the clock and your device, right? The clock relies heavily on the mobile phone to synchronize using an app called Garmin Connect, and this one, Garmin Connect worked 50% of the time. Like, more than often did you have to like either restart the app or restart the watch, and it was really clear what made the connection not work. But relying on like the phone to see weather on this one was, maybe once every 2 weeks it would work. The Epix Gen 2, on the other hand, is much better. It seems that, again, this came out in 2017. It seems over the 5 years they've been working on this that they have improved this. And again, was half-baked when this thing came out, now it's getting a bit more baked, but we still have the same problem where some of the features you do in Garmin Connect doesn't sync, some of the things you try to change, you have to like sync many times. If you create a route in Strava and sync it, and then update it in Strava, you have to first delete it with your phone in Garmin Connect from the device, sync, resync it from Strava, and then sync again in order for it to actually update on the watch. It doesn't track kind of like version changes from other apps. So there's a lot of these things that like, they seem good on paper. It feels more like it's setting up kind of a virtual file system. I don't know exact technical details, but based on how it seems, it's like just doing like rsync of a couple of files. And it's also really slow to sync. If you go out running for a while and you come home, it can take up to like 2-3 minutes to sync an activity. Which to me, I use the latest iPhone. Nothing else I use over Bluetooth is that slow. It's just really not that fast when it comes to synchronization. So that's one of the features that's half-baked. But I think the thing that for this generation, scream half-baked, the thing that absolutely hasn't improved, that is the music feature of this clock. So now we're in the music player. And this is what I mean with a half-baked feature. Like, I've downloaded some music to the app, and let's play some music to my headphones. Now you're wondering, like, okay, this is a cool, it's a continuous mix by John Digweed, and that's great. It's like 1 hour, perfect for running, some progressive house, just keep you going. What if I want to fast forward? Can I use the touchscreen for that, do you think? No, because of course, they implemented none of these features that you would want on a music player with the touchscreen. Because it's a half-baked feature. This is the classic Garmin problem, is they just try to tick the feature box. Yes, we have music player. Yes, we have this thing. Yes, we have XYZ. But they're not thought out, right? I can't do anything with this, which is, if you have a track, you want to be able to like swipe back and forth and go through the track. But it's really just like, and then you're wondering like, can I drag the volume? No, I have to press. There's no sliding, which is insane. The Touch UI is perfect for sliders. If you use an iPhone or an Android, you know this. It's like what they're built for. But Garmin, in their infinite wisdom, decided like, no, we're going to half-bake this feature. As like most other features they try to add to this operating system, it just takes way too long. When they say it's done, it's not done. But I think the real problem with the music feature on this watch is actually kind of related to what I was talking about before, which is the stability of the Bluetooth stack. More than once, when I'm out running, it just lost connection with my headphones and refused to pair with them again. And at first I was like, oh, must be interference outside. So I used the Bose QC35 and I sat inside here for a while, and it did the same thing after a while. It's like, this seems like the Bluetooth stack on the devices crashes, and you have to wait a while, and it has to come back up. But the even more annoying part is, when it first connects to your headphones, it seems to negotiate like a lower quality of audio. So if you start playing too fast, you get the lower quality audio. But if you pause a while and let it kind of like renegotiate the Bluetooth audio quality, it gets better. Which is like, this is something that, my iPhone 3GS did for me automatically. And the fact that I have to like kind of manually pause and stop music to make it sound good in the Bluetooth headphones is like, what year is this? Why is this something I have to do manually? This just works on all other devices I use seamlessly. Shouldn't be this bad. And the last thing you want to do when you're running is to stop and try to, renegotiate your audio quality or reconnect your headphones. I'd rather just run with my iPhone in my hand because at least that works. And I know it just works seamlessly and I can keep running and I don't have to bother about technology. Like a running watch is at its best when it gets out of your way, when it just helps you achieve your goals. And for every time this happens, I'm like, why would I ever use this? It's really not a baked feature. My second problem with the Garmin devices is just how underdeveloped the Connect IQ store is. And if you just compare, like I opened the Connect IQ store and it's just a mishmash of categories. It's not really clear if it's a data field, if it's an application, if it's an activity, if it's a glance. It's really hard to tell because they're all just like mishmashed together into this thing. And, if I want to buy an application, there's no in-app purchasing available in the Connect IQ store. So I have to go into the description of these apps and then see like, oh, hey, I have to go to this separate link and acquire a license code. It feels like I'm back in the shareware days of the internet, right? Now compare this to, Apple's App Store, which is, yes, it's an unfair comparison. Apple has a much bigger install base, but still, I see the apps, I understand these apps, I understand what they do on the watch. They've made it very, very concrete what I'm buying, what I'm installing, and also how I purchase them, how I pay for them. It is clear it's the same system, and it helps both, Apple and the developers to create good apps. But on top of that, that's not even the biggest problem. I think personally, I worked with software development for a long time, and Garmin in their infinite wisdom had decided to develop for these watches. You have to use their own Monkey C, which is supposed to be some easy to use, object-oriented version of C. I don't think it's C because you don't really get to manage memory the same way. If you are Apple or Google or Microsoft, you have the amount of developers in the install base where you can say, use this new language. But if you're Garmin, where the developers can be measured in like maybe a room, it's insane to then decide like we're going to have our own language and then not allow other people to cross-compile against the bytecode. I would not have a problem with them trying to build a good SDK and a user experience for their developers if they let our people write C or Rust or whatever they want and cross-compile to the watch. Now, for every app developer that wants to target the Garmin ecosystem, they have to make a specific commitment to say, we're going to develop a custom application for the Garmin ecosystem. It's really hard to share code because the language is custom, right? And if we look at what the SDK offers, here's a screenshot from their forums. I want to play a small sound on a device that can play sound. Nope, not supported in the SDK. And that is why the Garmin ecosystem suffers so much. But let's look at Swift, which is the kind of way Apple wants it to write apps. I go to Stack Overflow and I have a problem. I search for Swift. Look here, there's tons of people that can answer my question, or there are tons of people that already gotten that question answered. If I search for, Monkey C on Stack Overflow, there's basically no one.
Documentation.
And yes, Garmin has their own forum, but so has Apple. It's just, there's more people that have problems. As a developer, it's much easier to get answers to your questions. And that really matters when you come into how do you enable junior developers to experiment with ideas and how do you push the ecosystem forward? And from that perspective, I just don't understand the play Garmin is making by saying we're going to have our own flavor of C that isn't really C because we want to. It doesn't add anything. And I think, in fact, that is why, in my opinion, the Connect IQ ecosystem is so broken and it's just basically a pile of trash. So let's talk about the last point I have, which really bothers me about the Garmin ecosystem, which is the insistence that you have to buy a new device to get new features. This is true of any manufacturer, but if you compare the software updates you get from Google or Apple for their devices, it's just night and day of what they're how they're pushing the floor across all devices for all users. With Garmin, let's take something simple as the first beat metrics. It's a small algorithm. I get that the people on the back end are working really hard to measure, etc. But what's baked down on the device, from my understanding, is essentially an algorithm that takes your heart rate when you run, and your resting heart rate, and some other things, and your pace, and calculates a value like, is your condition improving? And Garmin has decided like the only way to get the newer first bit algorithms is to upgrade your watch. And I am pretty certain, because I use a chest strap, that there's nothing specific with the sensor on the new Garmin that I need, right? It's just a software update. And for some reason, they've decided that, like, yeah, the Phoenix 5 never got that update, right? It still has the first beat metrics it shipped with, which is really frustrating, because I don't want to buy a new device every 2 years, or every year for that matter. I understand there are some features like a new screen, or like a better heart rate sensor, or Bluetooth audio support, or Garmin Pay that requires new hardware. But some of the software that Garmin decides to gate, or like the stamina field is one of those examples, these are just like, it makes no sense to gate them. And I understand also that Garmin has been hesitant to providing a subscription ecosystem, but at least, I think what they're saying here is like, you have to buy a completely new watch for, $900. I think instead, provide a way for people to extend the life of the watches. Like, yeah, you get 2 years of feature updates. After that, you have to subscribe to get the next feature updates, right? And I actually think, like, as Apple and Google are catching up, you see Apple specifically going hard into the fitness features. If Garmin wants to stay competitive, they gotta figure this out. I don't think you can keep saying like buy a $1,000 watch or a $900 watch every year to get the new features. You gotta figure out a monetization model, which comes back to the state of the Connect IQ store, where you don't have to sell new watches every year to make a profit, right? So if you're coming into the ecosystem as a new user and you think like, oh, I'm buying into this watch and I'm gonna get like free software updates because you come from Apple Watch, it's not how it works. So I think this kind of concludes my rant about the Garmin ecosystem, the Garmin watches. Is there more to say about this? Yes, of course. I try to not go too deep into like the technical features of the watch, because there's like 5 other reviews of the Epix Gen 2 that you can go watch. DC Rainmaker has a great one. Would I recommend buying the watch? Like, if you have the money to spend, and if you are like in the market for a new running watch and you have it upgraded the last 5 years and you really want good maps, I actually think it's still a decent buy. It's built like a tank. Like, if you look at this thing that's been wimping for 5 years, this has seen heaven and hell almost. And like, the screen hasn't even scratched. The rest of the body has scratched for sure, but it's really well built. I will give Garmin, like, when it comes to build quality, this has really held up. We'll see how this one new holds up, but like, from my perspective, like, yeah, maybe if you don't need the maps, I think the Phoenix 7 is a much better buy. It's a much more economic buy. You get better battery life. There's like many pros and cons. So I guess I will end this review by saying, if you're gonna buy a Phoenix 7, make sure to never look at an Epix screen.